Right now, Europe is uniting like never before. Finland says it out loud. Real security guarantees for Ukraine mean Europe must be ready to fight Russia. 8 EU countries still buy Russian gas, but Brussels is moving to finally cut the Kremlin's energy lifeline. Russian jets violated Estonia's airspace, and the EU and Nato are preparing two-thought response. And now the EU is planning a drone wall on its eastern border after Moscow drones exposed dangerous gaps. Russia thought it could divide Europe, but the opposite is happening. The West is standing stronger than ever. Welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Zaroslava Kolesnikova, and in this episode we will show you how Europe is turning Russia's aggression into the greatest defeat. Finland's security guarantees mean Europe must fight Russia. Europe cannot just stand by. Finland's President Alexander Stubb says real security guarantees for Ukraine must mean Europe is ready to fight Russia if Moscow dares to attack again. These guarantees, he stressed, will come into force after a future peace deal, but Russia will have no veto, no say, and no escape. So what exactly will these guarantees look like, and how far is Europe ready to go? Full story in report.
Ukraine has made significant progress in negotiations on security guarantees from the United States and European partners, said Ukraine's first Deputy Foreign Minister Serhiy Kyslytsya. It seems to me that we are making progress, and I can agree with those who say that the progress is insufficient or not as obvious as we would like, but we are indeed achieving success. And I think the turning point came during the meeting in Washington, D.C., when the Americans and President Donald Trump himself confirmed that the United States would be part of the security guarantees. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Ukraine has prepared the foundation for security guarantees that Europe is ready to provide. Given that the United States will be involved, the parties have held many discussions and dialogues at various levels. The most recent took place on September 20th, 3 days before the opening of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, discussed security guarantees for Ukraine with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. We discussed preparations for security guarantees for Ukraine, as well as expanding cooperation in military, defense, and economic spheres. Together with Marco Rubio, we noted the importance of the upcoming meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump as part of the ongoing dialogue between the two leaders aimed at achieving a just peace. Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on Telegram. Volodymyr Zelensky plans to meet with Donald Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Around 100 presidents and more than 40 heads of government will gather in New York for the high-level week. The president of Ukraine stated that during his meeting with the head of the White House, he wants to determine how close the parties are to understanding that security guarantees must be exactly what Ukraine needs. The negotiations between the presidents of Ukraine and the United States could play an important role in achieving a peaceful settlement, according to Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN, Andriy Melnik. Personally, I have a good feeling that we will be able to find a very delicate way to make Russia understand that it can no longer hide behind pretexts and explanations. We need to bring them back to the negotiating table, and unfortunately it seems that the United States and President Trump are currently the only ones capable of achieving this goal. Andriy Melnik, permanent representative of Ukraine to the UN, in an interview with Deutsche Welle. President Trump has repeatedly stated that he is disappointed in Putin. The head of the White House called on oil exporters to lower fuel prices. He emphasized that the United States is increasing oil production and doing everything possible to reduce the cost of raw materials. According to Trump, such economic pressure is capable of forcing Russia to end the war against Ukraine. After all, the main source of funding for the Kremlin still remains the trade in energy resources. This will automatically stop Russia's war against Ukraine, lower the prices just a bit more, and it will stop the war. I am disappointed in Putin, but they will lose. 5,000 people are dying every week. Between 5 and 7,000 people are dying every week for no reason. Security guarantees for Ukraine are essentially meant to serve as a deterrent, and they must be convincing. The president of Finland is certain. And this is only possible if European countries are prepared to go to war with Russia in the event of new aggression from Moscow. And of course, Putin does not and will not have a veto right over the format of security guarantees for Ukraine, Alexander Stubb emphasized. Russia has absolutely no say in the sovereign decisions of an independent state. So for me, it's not a question of whether Russia will agree or not. Of course it won't, but that's not the point. Alexander Stubb, president of Finland, in an interview with The Guardian. However, to begin with, according to Alexander Stubb, it is necessary to achieve progress in the negotiation process. President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly stated his willingness to meet with Putin. The President of the United States is also ready for a trilateral meeting. But Putin refuses to participate in high-level talks and only intensifies strikes on Ukraine. Natalia Gusova for Freedom TV channel.
8 EU countries still buy Russian gas. Europe pushes to cut ties. Europe promised to break free from Russian energy, but 8 EU countries are still buying gas from Moscow. Belgium, France, Greece, Hungary, the Netherlands, Portugal, Slovakia and Spain continue to import Russian pipeline gas and LNG. Now the European Commission is pushing for new plans to diversify supplies and finally cut the Kremlin's energy lifeline. How soon can Europe end this dependence and what will it take? Full story in our report.
Brussels will increase pressure on the Kremlin, announced the President of the European Commission after 3 Russian fighter jets illegally entered Estonian airspace. Ursula von der Leyen called on EU leaders to approve the 19th package of sanctions against the aggressor country as soon as possible.
Putin keeps escalating the situation, and in response, Europe increases the pressure. That is why I am presenting the 19th package of sanctions. The first concerns energy. Russia's war economy is supported by revenues from fossil fuels. We want to reduce these revenues, so we are banning the import of Russian LNG to European markets. It's time to turn off this tap, and we are ready. To this end, we are saving energy and also diversifying our supplies.
In order for the 19th sanctions package to be voted on in time, Brussels is seeking a compromise with Budapest. Thus, the European Commission plans to unfreeze about 550 million euros in its own fund accounts to assist Hungary. This was reported by the Financial Times, citing sources.
Orban, who faces parliamentary elections this spring, has repeatedly refused to reduce his country's dependence on cheap energy imports from Russia and has repeatedly postponed the introduction of sanctions against Moscow. Brussels froze about 22 billion euros from EU funds allocated to Hungary in 2022 due to concerns over the independence of the judiciary, asylum rights, discrimination against LGBT+, and academic sovereignty. However, the European Commission is gradually unfreezing these funds to appease Orban, from the Financial Times publication.
The United States is also joining in the pressure on the aggressor. American senators will propose a new bill to Congress. According to the Financial Times, it targets Russian liquefied natural gas projects and also provides for expanded sanctions against Russia's defense industry. In addition, there are plans to broaden restrictions on Russia's shadow fleet.
The new bill will significantly expand U.S. sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, which Moscow has used to circumvent Western restrictions on its energy sector since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The revenues from this crude oil export have helped finance Moscow's war efforts. Shadow vessels, often aging tankers, have hidden owners, which makes it difficult to enforce sanctions. However, measures targeting the vessels themselves have proven effective, from a Financial Times publication.
Washington can play a decisive role in Europe's complete rejection of Russian energy resources, the president of Ukraine is convinced. At a meeting with journalists, he stated that if Donald Trump takes serious steps, it will push some European countries toward this decision. For example, Slovakia is close to a compromise. Vladimir Zelensky is convinced.
But achieving this is a very complicated process. The main thing is the result. I believe that, on the contrary, if President Trump takes serious steps, he will push some European countries that are engaged in energy economics with Russia even harder. Everyone is looking at the United States, in my opinion. Orban can't be left alone. By the way, it's not just Orban or Hungary and Slovakia. There are some other countries as well that provide the necessary infrastructure for all of this, for Russian energy resources. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, at a meeting with journalists, from a publication by Interfax Ukraine.
At the same time, if Russia is excluded from the list of suppliers, there is no need to fear a shortage of energy resources. According to Bloomberg agency estimates, the global gas market will be oversupplied in the second half of 2026, which will reduce risks for Europe and help avoid a price spike. Such conditions will become a key factor for the European Union in determining a new deadline for phasing out imports of Russian LNG. Larisa Petruk for Freedom TV channel.
A
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Russian jets violate Estonia, EU and NATO to respond. Russia fighters' jet crossed into Estonian airspace and Europe is taking it seriously. EU Council President Antonio Costa confirmed the incident will be a key topic at the informal EU summit on October 1st. He says alliance must strengthen the eastern flank of both the EU and NATO or increase the pressure on Moscow. What steps will the Baltic states and NATO take to stop Russia's provocations? The details in our report.
On September 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31K fighter jets entered Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland without authorization and remained there for 12 minutes. Estonia called the incident brazen and deliberate. At the same time, the country's defense minister, Hanna Pevkur, assured that the situation was under control. To intercept the Russian aircraft, F-35 fighter jets from allied Italy, Finland and Sweden were scrambled.
In fact, we responded even before they entered, and we monitored them very closely. We all understand that the eastern flank must be protected. We have also already made some decisions within the country about what we can do in the event of a drone attack based on the experience gained on the battlefield in Ukraine.
In Russia, the accusations of illegally violating the airspace of a sovereign state were denied. The Russian Foreign Ministry stated that the fighter jets were allegedly making a scheduled flight from Karelia to an airfield in the Kaliningrad region. The Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs handed a note of protest to the Russian chargé d'affaires in the country. This is already the 4th case of Russians violating the airspace since the beginning of the year. The Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted, "Right now, it is important for us to demonstrate NATO's unity and show Putin that he cannot keep crossing the line," the head of Estonia's foreign ministry emphasized.
Putin only understands the language of force. We are talking about Russian aggression against Ukraine, so we need to increase military support for Ukraine. We need to increase pressure on Putin by using new sanctions and tariffs. And when it comes to his provocations against NATO, we must show that we are united, ready and capable of strengthening our capabilities. We also understand that the Russians are trying to divert attention from Ukraine and force NATO countries to deal with their own problems. For years we have watched as Russia refuses to accept and respect international law. They have repeatedly violated our airspace in the past. And as we can see, they have now started sending drones into Poland.
NATO and the EU have responded to the Russian provocation in Estonian airspace. This is yet another example of Russia's reckless behavior and a demonstration of the alliance's ability to respond, wrote Bloc representative Alison Hart on the social network X. The allies support Estonia, assured the head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas.
We will continue to support our member states in strengthening their defense with European resources. Putin is testing the resolve of the West. We should not show weakness. Kaja Kallas, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy on the social network X.
In Lithuania, they recalled that there had never been a state in Lithuania and also how Turkey shot down a Russian Su-24 in 2015. At that time, Turkish servicemen recorded the incursion of 2 bombers into the country's airspace. Within 5 minutes, the military issued a series of warnings to the Russian pilots. Only 1 aircraft responded. The second was hit by a Turkish F-16 fighter with a missile. Turkey set an example 10 years ago, noted the head of Lithuania's defense ministry.
In fact, it doesn't really matter whether the drones or aircraft entering our territory are lost. In any case, they pose a direct threat to the safety of our citizens. That is why we truly need to be protected and feel safe.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the incident part of a broader Russian campaign to destabilize European and NATO states. Moscow must receive a tough response. The head of state is convinced.
Strong actions are needed, both joint and from each individual country. Russia must feel greater pain from international pressure, primarily through the economy, and sanctions are the best way to ensure this, said Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on the social network X.
The head of the White House also responded to yet another Russian provocation.
I don't like it when things like this happen. There could be big problems, but I'll let you know later.
After the incident with the Russian fighter jets, the Estonian government requested urgent consultations with NATO in accordance with Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. The EU also intends to discuss a joint response from the 27 member states to Russia's actions in the near future.
EU plans drone wall on eastern border. Gap in defense exposed. Europe is moving fast to close the skies. EU Commissioner for Defense and Space, Andreas Kubilius, will meet with defense ministers next week to push for a drone wall along the Union eastern border. The plan was discussed even before Russian drone violated Nato airspace in Poland, but now the gaps in Europe's defense are impossible to ignore. Can the EU build a shield strong enough to stop Moscow's drone? Full story in our report.
Ukraine must be present at the negotiating table when discussing the concept of the European drone wall, according to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak.
We are the only country in Europe that is waging a modern war against Russia. Since the Second World War and the Cold War, the principles of warfare have changed, and in recent years drones have played a key role. That is precisely why armies need to change as well. We need to focus on artificial intelligence, which will be integrated into UAVs, both strike and anti-aircraft. Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russia is capable of launching up to 800 strike drones in a single night. In response, Ukraine can deploy at least 1,000 interceptor drones to repel attacks, according to Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal. Moreover, Kyiv is ready to help its neighbors fend off attacks from the aggressor. To protect the skies, Ukraine and Poland will create a joint operational group for unmanned aerial systems. The relevant document was signed in Kyiv by the defense ministers of both countries. The Polish-Ukrainian group will include representatives of the armed forces of both countries. Its work will serve as a platform for coordinating and developing joint initiatives in the field of UAVs. Kyiv will share software products and real combat experience with Warsaw. There are also plans to expand joint projects for weapons production.
We have agreed on a number of important steps. The first of these is the creation of a joint operational group on unmanned aerial systems, which will be headed by representatives of the armed forces of Ukraine and Poland. This group will serve as a platform for coordinating and developing joint initiatives. We will integrate the latest defense technologies and initiate new projects aimed at strengthening the protection of our people and critical infrastructure. A central element of this group's work will be joint training programs, which I am confident will strengthen our ability to resist our common enemy.
This is a serious challenge, a great opportunity for all of Europe, because it concerns not only Poland. We are also in negotiations with the European Commission. I spoke with Commissioner Kubilius about measures that the European Union could take together with other countries on the eastern flank. After all, this concerns the entire eastern flank of the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance. We are talking about training engineers and soldiers who will stand up to the aggressor and defend the airspace.
The President of the European Council is also calling for strengthening Europe's defense. Antonio Costa has invited the leaders of EU countries to an informal meeting in Copenhagen on October 1st. The main topics of discussion will be protecting Europe from Russian threats, increasing support for Ukraine, and tightening sanctions pressure on the aggressor country.
Our security is inextricably linked to the security of Ukraine. In Copenhagen, I would also like to discuss how we can further support Kyiv and achieve a just and lasting peace. To this end, we must in particular consider how to continue supporting the Ukrainian armed forces as the main guarantee of the country's sovereignty and security, while simultaneously increasing pressure on Russia, including by tightening sanctions. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, from a statement on the European Council's website.
The head of the European Council also noted that in recent months, allies have moved closer to increasing defense funding and supporting their own defense industrial complex. Costa emphasized that now every euro must work to strengthen our collective security.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you believe Russia's defeat is inevitable and Europe unity must be heard worldwide, like, comment and subscribe. Want to do more? Become a sponsor and join our fight for truth. Your support helps us uncover lies, expose war crimes and keep Ukraine's voice strong. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine.